If there had been no Israel, there would be no problems today. Of course, he says, the immediate post-war world was a different time. The world had just witnessed the horrors of Hitler's racist excesses, and collective Western guilt for the Holocaust dictated attitudes toward the idea of a Jewish state. Even the UN could not withstand the moral pressure. On November 29, 1947, it passed General Assembly Resolution 181, the Partition Plan. Notice he calls it a plan to carve a Jewish state out of Arab Palestine. Oh, so there already was an Arab Palestine. They just carved the Jewish state out of the Arab Palestine. However, it was never ratified by the Security Council and so does not exist in law. In other words, the Jewish state is illegal and does not exist. That's what he said. Which means the UN played no role in the creation of Israel. Nevertheless, the, quote, partition plan, end quote, was utterly illegal and a violation of the UN Charter because the UN had no right or power to take land from one people and give it to another. If it hopes to play a meaningful role in the 21st century, the UN must do more than simply promise to enact reforms. It must search deep within its soul to redress the fundamental violations of its founding principles, which have long since ceased to have any force. That recommitment must begin now, for it was 60 years ago today, May 11th, 1949, that Israel became a member of the UN. The UN cannot hope to achieve any measure of peace or justice as long as it condones war crimes, which it does every day that Israel is allowed to flout its terms of admission. The past cannot be undone, but the future can change. Ban Ki-moon says, listen, as its newly elected Secretary General, I promise that the UN will no longer be a passive enabler of genocide. Therefore, I will ask the General Assembly to meet in special session at the earliest possible time to strip Israel of its membership. That's what he said. To strip Israel of its United Nations membership. Ordinarily, a motion to expel a member nation would have to come at the recommendation of the Security Council. But this is not an ordinary motion, because Israel is in violation of its terms of admission. It is not a member in good standing. So the UN has every right to declare the General Assembly Resolution 273 null and void. Since Israel's membership depends on adherence to that resolution, its expulsion is automatic. Essentially, the unavoidable, lamentable truth is of the past 6 decades is that the UN has been a moral and political failure because it has refused to enforce its own rules and defend the Charter. Nothing the UN does will have any value as long as this illegitimate member occupies a place in the General Assembly. I want the UN to have value. I count on your support. Thank you very much. That's Ban Ki-moon. Now, if this had been spouted by, shall we say, Ahmadinejad, we could say, oh, just rhetoric. If this had been spouted out by Yasser Arafat or some other member of the Arab world, we could say, you know, that's par for the course. But this is the United Nations Secretary General, the head of the UN, wants to expel Israel's membership. They've never done that to any other country in the world. They, the United Nations, voted to establish the State of Israel. And now Ban Ki-moon says, we never had anything to do with it. We didn't do that. We just accepted their membership into the UN on condition that they would let the poor Palestinian refugees come back home and pay them for any damages and reinstate them to their properties, etc., 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 infinitum. What can I say? This is the most troubling thing I have ever seen. But you know what? It sure fits into biblical prophecy. Israel is going to be the whipping boy of the world. If Mr. Ban Ki-moon had his way, he would dismantle the state of Israel. If there is no Israel, then the UN could go in and just take them apart. They want to undo what they did 60 years ago. We must be living in apocalyptic times when the days get darker and darker, politically, economically speaking. We can look up, for our redemption draweth nigh. I'm J.R. Church. We'll see you again tomorrow with our analysis of the news.